Let's bring in CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver, who's standing by in the Capitol with more. Annie, good to see you.
Hi, Todd.
All right, so the significance of this here, walk us through some of the details and obviously the broad strokes, too, of what it means.
Well, the Prime Minister today, Todd, is really framing this as a memorandum of understanding that's not just about a pipeline. He's trying to say that this is much broader, sort of a reset with Alberta in terms of relations, a chance for Canada to sort of take back its economic strength, to become an energy superpower, to reduce its reliance on the United States and reduce emissions all at the same time. But really the central focus point here is this pipeline. This is something that the Alberta Premier has been pushing for quite some time, saying that there is a strong demand to move 1 million barrels of oil a day from Alberta to the northern western coast of British Columbia. So this is really the central pillar here. Essentially, what's happened is the government of Alberta will be proposing this Alberta pipeline as a major project. The goal for that is sometime before July 1st. Then once that's done, the federal government says it will look at the project and it will aim to prioritize it as something that's in the national interest to help remove some of the regulatory burdens, streamline the process to help get this approved. Now, the government and Carney are really throwing their political capital behind this pipeline project, Todd, saying that they will support it, they will try to get it through, but that Alberta does have to meet some conditions. One of them, the federal government says this has to be private capital that is funding the pipeline. It can't be taxpayers' dollars. If you can't find private capital, you can't find private companies to join on board, then this pipeline won't happen, although Alberta will be the proponent. So that's one hurdle here. The Alberta Premier was asked about that. She said, look, it's not a big deal. A lot of the kind of hurdles that people were concerned about have now been pushed aside with this memorandum. And so Danielle Smith says she's confident they will be able to find private dollars to get this built. In addition, it also has to be Indigenous co-owned, which means you need Indigenous partners as part of this. The Alberta government has said they have a loan program that can help substantially by offering a lot of money to provide the backing necessary for some Indigenous communities if they want to join on to the ownership of this project. Now, in addition, they also have to talk to the BC government as well as other First Nations. But interestingly, there is no veto in here for British Columbia. Danielle Smith was very clear about that she has to engage and wants to engage with British Columbia as well as Indigenous communities, but that British Columbia is not given a veto. What this memorandum of understanding does say is that you have to work with British Columbia and that the federal government will prioritize and work with the province of British Columbia to get major projects that it's proposing forward. And BC has already done that. It's already proposed a number of projects that are now being picked up by this new major projects office. Okay, now one other part of this is the big Pathways project. This is also contingent. If this Pathways project is not advanced and sort of does not start construction and move along the same timeline as the pipeline, then you can't do it. So the Pathways project is a combination of 6 of the major oil companies, and together what they intend to do is create a $16 billion program of carbon capture and storage, essentially taking carbon out, pushing it into a pipeline that goes deep underground into the Cold Lake area. And what that would do is this pipeline underground is essentially a way to take carbon out of the atmosphere, out of the emissions, and store it underground. And this is a way that the Prime Minister says that this new pipeline will have significantly reduced carbon impact and reduced emissions. And so those two projects really are part and parcel. You can't have one without the other. There are a bunch of additional changes in here as part of that. Alberta, as you pointed out, saying that they're going to increase the industrial carbon tax. A deal with the feds have to be worked out exactly on that in the few months. The federal government saying that if this project does go ahead, they are open to adjusting the tanker ban. That's a very controversial move that the BC Premier and First Nations are not going to enjoy, Todd.
I mean, ultimately, people at home may not understand, but the federal government does, of course, ultimately have the authority over interprovincial trade. That does include pipelines. So BC does not technically have a veto, but as you're saying, you know, the idea of including them in the conversation, trying to build a consensus, seeing if there are any things that British Columbia wants in order to agree with this is probably going to be part of that. Let's talk about the reset of the relationship, too, politically between Alberta and Ottawa. I mean, the Premier of Alberta, Annie, I know you were listening in, said, you know, this kind of thing would never have happened under former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
And it's interesting because it really is a reversal here of a lot of the environment and climate change policies that the Prime Minister previously had talked about. So Justin Trudeau, for example, was the one that put in this 2019 tanker ban that now the federal government is considering adjusting so that this pipeline can get built and oil can get to Asian markets. In addition, you know, the planned emissions cap, that was another thing that the Prime Minister had put in place to that was going to be taking effect soon. The federal government is now saying, no, look, we're going to take out this emissions cap as long as the province of Alberta follows through on certain milestones. Same with canceling the planned clean energy agreement. This was essentially an emissions cap on energy using natural gas, and Alberta was not in favor of this. They didn't want this to take effect. I believe it was in 2035 it was planned. Now that's being pulled back. So there are some major policies here that the federal government under Justin Trudeau implemented that are now being reversed by the Carney government. The Alberta Premier, as you point out, said that these were barriers to expanding and enhancing the oil sector in Alberta, and it was, you know, slowing down their progress, their ability to get energy out of the ground. And she said now that those hurdles are removed, it will be easier to expand the oil sands. And she also said that because of the changes in this MOU, it will be far easier to get private companies who were previously sitting on the sidelines to invest in major projects like this pipeline.
Annie Bergeron-Oliver in Ottawa, setting it all up. Lots of ground to cover. Well done. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Todd.